Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. John J. Pershing and Douglas MacArthur are both towering figures in American military history. Pershing as the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I, and MacArthur as a key leader in World War II and the Korean War. In terms of age, they were separated by about 20 years, but they were both first captains at West Point, both served as U.S. Army Chief of Staff, and both were absolutely devoted to the U.S. Army. Their interactions spanned decades, revealing a dynamic that oscillated between admiration, rivalry, and friction. World War I played a very key role in this complicated relationship. And today we're going to discuss these interactions during World War I, and we are joined by MacArthur Memorial Archivist Jim Zobel. So Jim, do we know when and where they first met?
Well, Douglas MacArthur says that it was in California, right around that 05, 04, 05 timeframe. That was when his dad had that Department of the Pacific and was there in San Francisco. I think he was at the Presidio. And Douglas MacArthur mentions meeting him in the office just briefly. But this is also right around that time that both the father, Arthur, and Pershing are the military observers in Japan. And I don't know if he never mentions that he meets him there, because he goes after that's Douglas, that is. He goes to Japan after the Russo-Japanese War is over, and that's when they go on that tour with the father. But I don't know if Pershing was still there, but he talks about meeting him there in California. And I mean, he definitely knows him. They're both first captains of West Point. So, I mean, they've got to know of them as well. Arthur MacArthur doesn't overlap the time that Pershing is in the Philippines, but he's very much up on, what's still going on there. And Pershing's very much a up and comer, by what is it? Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt promotes him over like almost every other officer to be a general, when he's at a very young age. And so, I mean, he's very much known. And I think MacArthur even, mentions in that reminiscences that, he knew who he was, but it was just his first time of meeting him. So it has to be in that California period when his dad was still serving and Arthur III was out there at Mare Island with the submarines and Bowman McCalla. And they talk about those days.
And in reminiscences, I mean, he seems most struck by Pershing's bearing, his physical presence.
Yeah.
Now, I spoke earlier of Pershing commanding the AEF in World War I. In early 1917, though, Frederick Funston, kind of another MacArthur family friend, had been officially tapped or unofficially tapped to lead American forces if the U.S. entered World War I. And then in February 1917, you have then Major Douglas MacArthur serving on the general staff. He's working for Secretary of War Newton Baker. He's the Army's first public affairs officer. And in Reminiscences, his autobiography, he writes that he is the one who informs a dinner party, including Baker and President Woodrow Wilson, of Funston's sudden death. And then he alludes to the fact that he plays a role in Wilson deciding to select Pershing as that future commander of American forces if the United States enters the war. So tell us about this. Do you think this is true?
Well, it makes sense to me because, MacArthur gets this word. Everybody pretty much knows that Funston will be the guy to go, but Funston is already, he's older. He's very much overweight. The only other people that would be able to run the Army would probably be like Leonard Wood or Hugh Scott or some of these people. But I mean, these guys were all fighting, Indians in the late 19th century, whereas Pershing is is still, he's a very vibrant person. It's like you said before, that MacArthur noticed his bearing. And so when Funston's gone, there's really only one person I think that shines out as someone that has the stamina to be able to go over, that is physically capable of doing this job, that has the brain power for it. So it makes sense to me that MacArthur would say Pershing would be the guy, to run to run the AEF. And I mean, he is, he knows Wilson because Baker took MacArthur to meet Wilson about the National Guard, using the National Guard in the war, and he's very close to Baker. So I mean, if anyone's going to go and tell Baker that Funston has died, it's going to be MacArthur. So I don't see anything wrong with that story, or why it wouldn't be true. It seems to very much make a lot of sense to me. So yeah, I believe it, and I believe that he probably did say Pershing was the one to run this, outside of Funston being gone. It makes perfect sense to me.
And I think he also is pretty consistent in reminiscences about saying, I got to meet with President Wilson. President Wilson was always very generous to me in our interactions. And it does seem that Baker, like you said, is bringing him into some of these earlier discussions, and that the president did ask him questions. And I think in this particular case, it was more a question of, maybe does the rank and file in the Army, would they maybe support Pershing? Would this be a popular choice as, commander? And I think MacArthur even says, I can't speak for the Army, but for me,
Yeah.
this is the guy. And he makes it seem as though that holds weight with Wilson, because they have this kind of long, not long, but, months long kind of relationship of, exchanging ideas at times.
And I think everybody knows in the War Department that MacArthur has a very capable mind, so to speak. And it's not just asking some junior officer. They all know that he's brilliant in his own right. That was attested to by Leonard Wood and Scott, even that comes after, was that if you had a problem, you go to MacArthur. And he's gonna be able to figure it out. So I think both Baker, who trusts MacArthur instinctively, and I think that probably just rubs off on Wilson as well. And both of these guys are Democrats, and MacArthur's not a Democrat. He's someone that they'll listen to as far as Army matters go, and because he is so well versed in that, and knowing all the press as he does, being the press guy for the Army, I think they look at him as someone, what is the country going to think, and so maybe, that question, like you said, it's like, I don't know what they'll think, but I'll tell you what I think. So it all makes sense.
MacArthur arrives in France with the 42nd Division then in November of 1917. And it seems that there is some friction with Pershing and his headquarters almost from the start. So, what are the problems between kind of MacArthur and Pershing during the war?
Well, when they get there, Pershing immediately gets rid of Mann, who's the commander of the Rainbow Division, and he puts in Menaher, and William J. Menaher, who was a classmate of his. And Menaher is going to get along really well with MacArthur. The thing is Chaumont, the headquarters, of what they're going to call the Chaumont people, which are the headquarters people. Immediately, they start taking all the great officers. They take, Somerville, who's the artillery officer there. They take a lot of the very junior officers that MacArthur had handpicked to be part of the division. And so he sees them as, waylaying all the guys that he's chosen. They tried to take Wild Bill Donovan, and even though we know that, they don't get along later, MacArthur put him in a car and they drove up to Chaumont, and MacArthur was like, I've got to have this guy. But then they start thinking that they're going to turn the Rainbow Division into their replacement division, which means they'll break up all the units and put them into the other divisions that have gotten there early. And MacArthur immediately writes to Baker, the Secretary of War, and goes over Pershing's head, goes over Chaumont's head, and it's basically like they're breaking up the Rainbow Division.
And if I could interrupt, he's a colonel at this point. He's still
Right.
chief of staff of the division. Okay.
Always punching above his weight. Yeah, for sure. And Baker basically comes back to to Pershing and says, that's my division. I put that together. You're not going to be breaking up that one. So I mean, immediately that's got everybody looking at him as like, that is MacArthur, as like some kind of upstart. And then they start sending people out there to investigate the rainbow as well as MacArthur. And James Harbord is one of the guys that comes out there. He knew MacArthur very well. And MacArthur's able to show him, my guys are ready to go. They're all up to speed. They just need some training to get in there. They're going to be fine. And Harbord agrees with that. The big problem with Pershing, as besides the Baker thing, is MacArthur starts going to this press guy and saying, put on all these newspaper reports back home about the Rainbow Division, which totally again just irks everybody at headquarters. And so I think MacArthur's definitely fighting for his division, but he's pretty much making a lot of enemies there at Chaumont, for people that are putting together operations and putting together, replacement things and whatnot. MacArthur's always able to bring in upper people from Washington to kind of squash those things. I think that Pershing put a limit on some of those stories, like so that they didn't get back home. But I think the die had been cast, and so from then on, it's always this kind of Pershing looking down his nose at MacArthur. In a lot of instances. I mean, but it's kind of that dichotomy of MacArthur. You get kind of sick of him because he's doing stuff like that, but then when he's on the battlefield, he's one of the best that they've ever heard of. At that point, and later in life, Pershing will remark about that. And so it's kind of a they look at him as like, man, this guy's just causing trouble, but then they're like, holy cow, he's really something. So he never gets reprimanded or cleared out. They tried to do it at one point, but that didn't happen. So.
Do you think it's fair to say that MacArthur is desperate for Pershing's approval? Because it does seem that he takes it a little personally, that it's people like Marshall that seem to have Pershing's, almost fatherly favor. What do you think?
Oh, I think definitely. I think that's something that he wants all the time. When he writes him at that one point, and he says to him basically, I see you going well beyond this to the next greatest step, meaning the presidency, that this will be the launching stone. I mean, he says that to a couple of other people in his life. I think he said it to Leonard Wood before, but I think that, yeah, he definitely wants that approval. And when going from Luneville, Baccarat to the Champagne, when they're at those rail yards and Pershing just comes in and lays into him, this is the worst division. It's all your fault. You've got to correct this. And MacArthur's just the chief of staff. He's not the head of the division, but Pershing takes it out on him. And MacArthur was just like, man, what did I do? And so but then again, right after that, that's when MacArthur's promoted to brigadier general. And, was Pershing against that? Because it seems like that was more Peyton March back in Washington that was really pushing that one, and of course Pershing's going to go along with it. But, I say this, I guess I've said it a couple of times, Pershing's a lot like MacArthur. That ultimate confidence in himself, that ultimate belief in himself. And you wonder if Pershing is seeing things in MacArthur maybe that he doesn't like about himself. And so maybe that's why, he's pushing this guy away, I mean, which is basically what's happening. I mean, yeah, he does have this other special relationship with people like Marshall, but you wonder if MacArthur's like, gosh, what do I got to do, in order to get his favor, and I think MacArthur does take things like that, the criticism, personally.
I think definitely does want the favor, but there's an element of competition there, too. I think
Yeah.
he certainly wants Pershing's favor, but he wants to, I think with his career and whatever he does, I think he still wants to outclass, outshine. And I think, we've talked before about his father and how much he admired and revered his father. I still think there's a teeny little strain of competitiveness there too, to
Mm.
surpass his father's achievements, to honor and remember everything his father did, but try to take it one more step further. And I guess by World War One, his dad's dead. Pershing's there, kind of an old family friend, kind of another connection to his dad. And I think you have that. I really want your approval. I really want to be in your inner circle in some ways, but I'm not. But it's okay because probably someday I will surpass,
Mm.
what you have done. So,
Or he's going to work towards that, most
right,
definitely. And I think that, it's also, kind of a passive aggressive thing in many ways because there's that one story where Pershing is like, us first captains have to stick together. And
right.
so,
Never flinch.
yeah, and so it's kind of like you and I are of the same ilk kind of thing that he says to him. But, then there's the other thing. So, you wonder if that's the way Pershing plays people, the way MacArthur plays people. You show
Mm,
him favor and then you
yeah,
can also show him that you're ticked off at him. Maybe it's like, I'm going to get more out of you if I do this. The problem is that they never really sat down and wrote down, this is exactly what I think of
right.
you.
How helpful would that have been to
you
all us
know, which
historians?
is like what you wish that they had done about everybody. This
Yeah.
is what I think of
Or
you.
or if they had been able to like tweet, in World War
Um,
One, like here's my thoughts.
yeah, right.
This is what I think of the orders today. But anyways, okay, so moving on then, let's talk about MacArthur's mother because she knew Pershing, and we
Yes.
know she wrote letters or sent cables to Pershing during the war about MacArthur. So tell us, I mean, what is she writing about?
Well, she wants Pershing to give him another star, or to give him a star, for that brigadier general position. And they figured out, of all these authors over the years, they figured out that those letters really didn't get to Pershing until after MacArthur had already been chosen to receive the brigadier generalship. But the letters are kind of like, my husband had such great fondness for you, won't you, you know, bestow upon him the honor of which you yourself have been given over the years. He's more than proved himself. And you got to wonder if she's, I haven't seen that letters went to Peyton March, but I'm sure they did. The chief of staff trying to work all, and that's what I've said about MacArthur's mother being the one who's very adept at working inner army circles in the benefit of her son.
As
You
were
know,
a lot of army
sure.
wives and mothers. It was very
Sure. I
common.
mean, it's just a general practice, that they have. And
Yeah,
so I think that she's always doing whatever she can to get either one of her sons advanced.
right. I think the MacArthurs are just, they leave quite a bit of a paper trail where other mothers and wives didn't, you know. So, but Pershing doesn't seem to be super put off
No, he
by
writes her
any of
back a
that.
very nice,
Yeah, he's very
very nice
courteous.
note.
He's very
Yes.
like, and then I guess when MacArthur's wounded and she's sending him like, oh my gosh, like I heard he's wounded. What is going on? He does seem to take the time to reassure her and give her
Yep.
like a status
Just
update,
fine. Yeah. Yeah.
and he's
No.
not doing that he can't do that for all the soldiers under his
No.
command, So he does seem to, respect her and maybe that's because of his
And shows that
relationship.
they do have, they're not just passing acquaintances.
Right. Yeah.
They know each other,
Mhm.
and at least that's what it says to me.
During the war, MacArthur receives 2 Distinguished Service Crosses and 7 Silver Stars, or what become Silver Stars,
Citations.
among other awards. I mean, there's there's so many awards and foreign decorations. There is an attempt to upgrade that second Distinguished Service Cross, which had been for actions at Hill, I think 288
Yeah, the
and
Côte de Châtillon.
242.
Yeah,
Okay. And to upgrade that to the Medal of Honor. Did Pershing derail MacArthur's World War One Medal of Honor
I think so.
or the effort to award MacArthur the World
Yeah,
War
I
One?
mean, because I don't think Pershing awarded any general officer a Medal of Honor during the war. The MacArthur thing, this is put in by Menaher, and it's also put in by Summerall, and is Flagler, who then becomes the commander of the Rainbow Division right after the war ends when Menaher goes on, and they send out once again, this officer to investigate, the MacArthur affair. And the chief of staff at that time was MacArthur's friend from the frontier days, Billy, gosh, what was his last name? I can't remember. But he was he had known MacArthur since, those days living on the frontier, and had been at Veracruz when MacArthur was there. And he goes on and he becomes the chief of staff when MacArthur is out. And he writes a letter to headquarters saying, you've sent this guy investigating. Is MacArthur worthy of the Medal of Honor? And he writes in there, I could get 1,000 testimonials from everybody in the Rainbow that says if anyone of the Rainbow Division deserves a Medal of Honor, it's Douglas MacArthur. And so everyone in the Rainbow believed it. All the general officers believed it. All his corps commander believed that he deserved the Medal of Honor for this. You had the two Signal Corps guys that were aides that were there when he went up to the wire, and I think that's when he talks with Ravi Norris there. But it's not given to him. It's not, it's denied. Now the thing is that right about the same time, they also want MacArthur to be a major general. And Pershing does push for that, but it's the War Department that stops that. They're not going to promote anybody else. And so it's kind of weird that he's not giving him or not bestowing that Medal of Honor, but yet he was pushing for him to get that second star right at the end. So, I mean, does he squash it? It seems like it, because everybody was testifying the fact that MacArthur above everybody else deserved it, but it doesn't go his way. And so there's that one document that we have where, there's all these check marks that Pershing put next to the names of other people that got it, but it's not there with MacArthur. So I think that, says it all.
Interesting. So after World War I, MacArthur becomes superintendent of West Point, and Pershing becomes chief of staff of the Army. And it's around this time that Pershing reviews MacArthur's performance or rates him. How does he rate MacArthur?
Well, he rates him as a very good officer, an exceptional officer, but he puts in there, in his efficiency report that this officer has a very high belief in his own abilities, which is something you really don't put in an efficiency report, but that's what he said. And that's because MacArthur as superintendent was, responsible to Pershing. And it's like we were talking the other day, and you were talking about how MacArthur or Pershing is just like, okay, we're trying to get money for everyone, just hold on, and enjoy this post. And MacArthur's just screaming to high heaven, I need money, I need to do all this stuff. And also there was one time he came down to meet with a senator in Washington, and he didn't go see Pershing. And Pershing was like, what are you doing coming down here, and you don't even report to me when you come here? And MacArthur, well, I was meeting this senator, I had to get back. And so, I mean, Pershing's just like, this stickler for protocol, and you better follow it. And so, I mean, it's just every time MacArthur seems to get on his bad side over some, slight that most people would be like, all right. But between those two, it's kind of, really noticed by both of them.
So you mentioned him being a stickler for, kind of the rules. And is it true that during World War I, so kind of flashing back a little bit, that Pershing has issues with MacArthur's dress?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because MacArthur doesn't wear the uniform the proper way. He has
Right.
these little extras, he has these little differences that's really kind of set him apart. But I imagine that drove Pershing
Well, I
crazy.
think that's why Pershing blames him at those rail yards, when they were going from Lunenburg to Baccarat, saying this is the worst looking division, it's slovenly, it's like disrespectful, and it's all your fault, and I think it's because MacArthur had adopted, that big green coat he wore. He doesn't put the grommet in his cap. He's wearing the high boots all the time. He's very,
He's got a riding crop sometimes.
yeah, it's kind of like they said the Beau Brummel of the AEF, or the
Right.
D'Artagnan of the AEF. And so I think Pershing definitely looked at, and if you notice, the first time MacArthur gets decorated by Pershing, he's there in the crunch cap, and he's got his riding crop and whatnot. And the second time that MacArthur gets decorated, he's wearing the pie plate. He's wearing
But isn't so
the Van belt, everything else.
when he gets the second one though, the war is already over, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there he is, finally wearing what he was supposed to be wearing on the front lines, the
Right,
steel
right.
helmet, the proper uniform. So I almost wonder if that drove Pershing crazy too. Like
I don't know. Yeah.
you couldn't do this the right way during the war. And then after the war in Germany, here I am giving you this award and you're dressed like you should have been months ago. So
But
I
we
don't know.
don't know. Did he put out some kind of thing to a staff guy like, okay, the chief does not want to see you in that cap. You better be in as regulation as you can be. So then maybe MacArthur's, sticking it to him by, okay, I'm going to wear the pie plate.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, was that what happened? So this is what I'm saying. There's this admiration and a need for approval from Pershing, but then there's almost this constant annoying him, or just picking
Yeah.
at him and competing with him, and it's such a interesting relationship. And like we said, it went on for decades. So why don't
Yeah,
you
until
walk us
until the late 30s. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So why don't you walk us through their relationship? So from that time after MacArthur's tenure at West Point, or towards the end of that tenure to Pershing's death.
Well, yeah, because after this, then MacArthur meets Louise.
Well, you're going to
And
have to explain more who Louise is.
Well, Louise Cromwell Brooks is the richest woman in America, basically. And during the war, she had lived over in Paris the whole time. And she was kind of the hostess for Pershing when he would have bigwig parties and things like that. And they were always, these rumors going around about the two. And we have all the letters between Pershing and Louise, and it shows they, maybe not intimate, but they'll definitely talk about everything. There's nothing off limits for these two to talk about. And Louise is very much a party girl and a flapper. And, she's divorced with 2 kids living over there in Paris at that time. But then, it gets weird because in the early 20s, she's pretty much hooked up with this Colonel Queckmeyer, who is Pershing's aide. And it's pretty much thought that she's going to marry this guy, Queckmeyer. But then she hears about Douglas MacArthur, and she gets a friend to take her up to West Point because she wants to meet this guy, Douglas MacArthur. And they meet, and it's, like fireworks for the both of them. And within a very short period, like a couple of days, I think, MacArthur asks her to marry him. And so she immediately throws over Queckmeyer, and they announce that they're going to get married. Pershing's got to be apoplectic about this. He's got to just be
Sure,
like,
that goes against some sort of unofficial like code of honor
"Oh
and
my
conduct.
gosh, this is," and even Louise's mom will just be horrified, by this, and she's a party girl herself, and so almost immediately after the wedding, MacArthur gets word that he's up for overseas duty, even though he had just recently got back from France, about 2 years before that. And so he's put on the list to go to the Philippines. And so people will say that Pershing exiled Louise and MacArthur to the Philippines because of this wedding, because of what happened to Queckmeyer. Queckmeyer, I think, dies shortly after that. And MacArthur and Louise go off to the Philippines, which MacArthur loves and Louise can't stand. But it's just, when MacArthur proposes marriage, he's got to know that she's hooked up. Does he know that she's hooked up with Queckmeyer? That's Pershing's, number one aide.
I think it would be hard to have not known that.
But if he knows about Louise and Queckmeyer, then he knows that's just going to be sticking it right to Pershing again. That he asked this girl to marry him, and she's all for it. What a great idea. Just stupid. But, so they're on the outs again. And it's really not until the 1930s when MacArthur secures Pershing's pension, that
There's
they'll
peace.
finally lay all that to rest,
Yeah.
you know. And
Because even prior to that, what about Pershing's memoir?
yeah, I mean, I remember you talk about that when Pershing came out with his memoirs, then Hugh Drum was going to do them, and MacArthur gave him, or there was an office made at the War Department for Drum to either write, or they were reviewing Pershing's memoirs.
I think it was to review.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
is not, it's, obviously we need to be historically accurate in this and that, but I feel like the fact that they actually dedicated space to investigate his memoirs was, if that's true, was just
Yeah.
like, wow. But you're
But
right.
it's
So,
right after that he gets him the
yeah.
pension, and it's
And then it's all
secured.
water under the bridge, right?
Yeah, and right before, right as World War II starting, MacArthur's like, send Warren, your son, out here, you know, which would have been disastrous, but they're still talking at that point. Pershing
Oh,
sending,
wow. So I didn't know that.
MacArthur, best wishes and things. Yeah, it comes right in the Corregidor period.
So wait a minute. So before the Japanese
No, this is
attacked,
after the Japanese come
oh
in.
my gosh. So
And
Pershing's
and
one,
Pershing's,
isn't that his one
sends a
surviving child?
yeah, and he sends, a message to MacArthur, we're all for you. You're the best guy in for this position. And MacArthur says something like, would love to have Warren out here. And I'd have to
Wow.
go back and look at exactly what that was. But they would have messages like that, going through the war and then up until the occupation period. I think Pershing dies in like 48. Is that right? I think that's right. And they would have, I'd have to go see when the last message was, but it was always, your birthday. MacArthur would send things on his birthday. So I think it was finally, sealed between them, after that 1930s period.
Yeah. Did you say 1948 for Pershing?
Yeah, is that
Yeah,
right?
that was right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So last question. We'll wrap this up. Towards the end of MacArthur's life, he writes of Pershing in his autobiography, and this is a quote: "My memories of him sustained and strengthened me during many a lonely and bitter moment in the Pacific and Korean wars. I could almost feel his warm hand on my back." And I think that's interesting because, like, as we've laid out, really until kind of the final decade or so, their relationship wasn't exactly warm. I
Yeah.
don't think it was very close, particularly during World War One. And so, is this MacArthur being kind of revisionist, or did his observations of Pershing during World War One truly and deeply influence his leadership in those later wars?
Well, he's the only real example that he has of a commander, of how a supreme commander operates, how he works things. And you can see a lot in the early days of World War II. There's MacArthur, tie, immaculately dressed, just like Pershing. It's not until like maybe late 42, early 43 that he takes, the World War I appearance back with like the leather jacket, the hat, the glasses, the pipe, and creates his own aura again. And so I think that, when he says that, he's probably thinking, that he was the only example he had of someone in high command and how they carried themselves and how they, worked with other people. So I don't think it's really revisionist. I think it's just a weird, relationship between them. He looks to him as the great soldier, but, is just kind of always irked that the great soldier doesn't always think of him that way. But I think once they get older, then that's all, and that's the way it is with MacArthur with a lot of people. Once he gets older, and they're out of each other's sphere, then they look at it with great fondness, and that's the way MacArthur even said of Eisenhower and these other people that, and Nimitz, that he doesn't get along well with, during the time frame, but afterward he's just, that guy was the best, that guy was the greatest. And so maybe it's just the way you think, you know. Now he doesn't feel that way about all the people from Korea, as we know, but you know, all these guys from World War One and, you know, onward, I think that MacArthur just has a reverence for them, you know, after the fact.
Well, thanks, Jim. That was really interesting.
Well, they're two interesting people.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.